Hey everyone, Jay here, and it's time for another Intro to Python lab. This is lab 25 in our series, and today we will be creating a class. Once we use it, we'll be able to create objects that are the type of our class and have all of the methods and properties that are within that class available to that object. Now, we've been using some objects in the past, although we didn't create those objects ourselves, but we have been using things that are objects. And we'll see how this is similar to some things that we've used before. We'll see that as we go through. Some of the things will look familiar. Once we define it and we begin to use it, you're going to say, oh yeah, we've done that before. We just weren't the creators of that thing. So let's get started. All right. Let's have a look here. I've got my beginning Python stuff, like always. I've got my shebang here at the top. And don't forget, at the very bottom, you got to have this if name is equal to main, then execute the main. All right. If you don't run the main function, then none of this actually happens. You'll have all your code. It'll all be written very well and perfect, but nothing will happen because you're not actually executing the main function. So don't forget that at the end. Uh, Moving on to the matter at hand, we're going to define a class. And I'm calling this one person. I'm making a very simple class so that we can all see what they do and understand what they are. So I have the basic class definition. I have the keyword class, and the name of my class is person. You can name it whatever you like. It is tradition that we name our classes beginning with an uppercase letter so that classes look different than variables. Okay. And then you'll see that the class is going to look a little bit different afterwards, I guess. In some IDEs outside of Thani, you'll see that the color changes as well. Um, but that's the name of our class. And of course, we have our colon afterwards, and then we have everything within our class. So these that I'm defining here, these next two things, I'm making functions within the class. When you make a function within the class, we'll call that a method of the class because it is a function which belongs to and is fully encapsulated within that class. Okay. You can't use this function unless you use it within the class because it is part of that class. So you'll see how we use it in a moment, and you'll see how it's different from our other functions. So the first function or method that I've defined is a Python standard. This is init, and we have double underscore init double underscore. That's the name of the function. If you don't create the init, it's going to be created for you by Python anyway. It's just not going to do anything. And that may or may not be what you want. If you don't want anything special, then you don't have to define it. However, I want to define some stuff to happen when I create a new person object. So anytime you create a new object of a new variable, right, a new variable that is one of your new class objects, whenever you create one of these new objects, the init function is going to be triggered immediately upon creation. So this is your chance to set default variables, for example. Okay, so this is a person and I'm setting a first name, a last name, and a favorite food. So I have myself. Okay, we can put this in here. This is kind of a Python thing. Only other languages don't put it in the list of arguments there, but we're going to put self, we're going to put first, and we're going to give it a default value. So I could just put first, okay, like I'm putting the variable up there, but something that we don't always do, but we do have available to us is if you put the variable name equals something, right? That's going to give it a default value. And if I create a person object and I don't give it anything, it will set the defaults. If I can set all of these defaults, and in some languages they enforce strictly that if you set defaults, you have to set defaults starting from the last argument and moving toward whatever default you have to have. And the nice thing is, if you have a default variable in there, you don't have to set the value of that when you create it. And we'll see that in action down below. But I'm setting a default for everything. I like to set a default for everything if possible. Okay. It just makes it easier to use in the future. It makes it a little bit more idiot proof if you have all the defaults set. Right? So first name Jay, last name Hawk, favorite food, street tacos. And if you're wondering what that is, there's my favorite tacos. I made that. Go me. All right, street tacos, my favorite food. So the default person in my program is me. Go figure, right? So I'm not just setting first equals first, last equals last, and food equals food. I'm setting the self dot first equals the variable that was passed in as first. So for this person, once I create a person, the default person, their self dot first is equal to value of first, which is J. And their self dot last. Okay, so it's important that you have that self dot in there, and the dot operator is also important when you have the object self dot, and we can use all of these self-defined parameters and methods that we're making. So parameters are going to be variables that are defined within the class. Methods are going to be functions that are defined within the class. And so the person class or any class has something called self, which refers to itself and its own parameters and methods. So that's the init. It's going to set all the defaults to a default value, or when you create a new person, you can give it new values that will override the defaults, and we'll see that as well. So the next method we're defining here is going to be called print data, and it just takes the self, which is nothing argument here for our sake, and it's going to print out first name, last name, favorite food is favorite food, and we have self.first, self.last, and self.food. Not just first, last, and food, because first, last, and food is a bit confusing. We might have some scope issues, like I had just mentioned. We don't have just first, last, and food. We have self.first, self.last. It's important that we are referencing that the class or the object references itself in order to be as specific as possible. If you are not very specific, you will run into the time at some point where the program will grab information that you weren't expecting because you're not specific enough. So we want to be as specific as possible. We want to say not just any first, okay? We don't want to run into any accidental scope problems. We want self dot first, okay? So this is the person. It's not the most basic class. It does have some defaults set. It has our init overridden, and it has a print data output. In JavaScript, you're very familiar with. If you use JavaScript, you'll have a toString method for pretty much every object, and that's what this is right here. I could have called this a toString. And so this is my person class, right? And now let's go look into my main function where we're going to create an object that uses this person class, and we're going to create two of them, one default, one custom, and we're going to output each one. All right, so here we have human 1 and human 2, very creative. Human 1 is the default person, so I'm just saying human 1 equals person, class name person, remember the uppercase letter. If you don't put an uppercase letter when you define your class, then you don't put an uppercase letter down here either. However, it's pretty standard. That's the way we make classes. They should be an uppercase first character. So human1 equals person with no special settings in the parentheses, and human1 is going to be the default. Okay? Human2 equals person with special parameters, and I've given this person the most common first and last name on the planet, I believe, Mohammed and Mohammed. I think those are the most common first and last names on the planet, if I'm correct. I could be wrong. And Mohammed's favorite food is, he doesn't just like street tacos like I like, he likes all the tacos. And I don't blame him because I like all the tacos, but I do have a special affinity for street tacos. So Mohammed likes all the tacos, and those are all of his variables there, all of his parameters. And then we're going to print data for each. And the print data, that's going to be the same in either case. And you may have noticed we're not using self anywhere in the main at all. We're not including it in the parameter list of our init right here. We're not including it here. We're not including it in the parameter list of our print data either. That's just the way Python works. Okay, I think it's pretty weird myself. But we're not including it. We include it here, but we don't include it here. And when we call print data, it's going to print, and I have the output here for us. So default person, J Hawk's favorite food is street tacos, and human2, the customized person, Mohammed's favorite food is tacos. And then, of course, my goodbye message at the end. So that's a pretty basic class. Right? I could have gotten really, really basic, but I wanted to give you some more information here. And that's it. That is a class in Python. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.